For those of you who may not know, Congressman Latta is the chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee subcommittee on communications and technology. So that means the oversight of all broadband issues and technology come through his subcommittee. We had Senator Lujan earlier. So now we have House and Senate bipartisan subcommittee leaders that are critical to our member companies. And as I introduce you, I'm going to introduce our member companies. INCOMPAS really is an all of the above association where we have fiber builders, wireless companies, 5G, fixed wireless, satellite, low Earth orbit. So if you can think of a company that is small to large, local, regional, national, we have members that reflect and represent each of those areas of the broadband and internet ecosystem. And so we'd like to think that as we work with our policy leaders, that we can give you a unique perspective, because we're not just a one size fits all, and we're competing and building in all parts of the country and in every market. And so we welcome you. Congressman Latta represents the western central part of Ohio. He and I both like to be outdoorsmen and enjoy that.
We can.
I grew up in a political family. Congressman Latta's father was in Congress. So he's a true, and I say this, I hope this is a good word, a true institutionalist for the good of the common interest and doing good things for the communities and the people he serves back home. So we're very thankful for you to come. You've been gracious enough to do this. It seems like several years now.
It seems like it was 2 weeks ago. Year goes by too quick.
Yes. But this is a very important time for our member companies, the members we represent. But I think more importantly, this is a very important time for the country to achieve some really big objectives that came out of the last Congress, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that has a very high objective and mission, which is to connect every American and every community. We had a panel earlier with Senator Fisher, Chairman Thompson of the House Ag Committee, and you have previously served on the Ag Committee. As we talked about precision agriculture and rural broadband, and we know that you've been a leader on that. But talk to us a little bit about your priorities on the House Energy and Commerce Committee as this historic level of funding is going out the door, the imperative to get it right and to make sure that it's done right and the funding goes to the right places in the right way. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the subcommittee's priorities, your priorities, and things that we can do, hopefully, to support you.
Well, thanks very much again for having me. And, for all those that don't know about Energy and Commerce Committee, we say this: it's the best committee in Congress.
That is a true statement.
We have the broadest jurisdiction of any committee in Congress, and in years past, more bills come of our committee that are signed into law than any other committee. But the other thing about serving on E&C, especially when you're looking at communications and technology and what we do, we have to look over the horizon 5 to 10 years. Because the problem is, if you're looking in the rearview mirror, if you're looking at the end of the car, you've already passed it. And with all the different companies out there and the entrepreneurs, the number one thing we want to make sure is that we're listening to them, that we get it done right. Because the last thing you want to do is say we're impeding anybody out there. And so, just looking back, especially with the infrastructure package, you're looking at $42 billion and another $18 billion on top of this. You're looking at around $60 billion. That's a lot of change. And so one of the things we have to do is make sure we get it right. And the other thing is that's having the proper oversight. And I think that's going to be one of the things that we'll be doing in committee, especially when you think about the departments and the agencies, that we'll have them in frequently to see what they're doing. But when you're looking at the other side of it then is when you're talking about making sure that we get things right is I've never had anybody ever tell me they're against regulations. I don't care what industry it is, they all say the same. I mean, I can almost shut my eyes and not know who it was to say it, but they all say, just give us regulations we can live with. And it's really important. So, I think that what the problem is that we're looking at right now, especially what's come out of the legislation from the last Congress, is that we've got to make sure that on the permitting side that we're not holding back, that we're not impeding, because again, that's where you run into a lot of these problems, because time is money. And so if we're going to say we're putting something off X number of years or X number of months, that this shouldn't have to take that long. Why is it taking that long? So I think that's going to be an important factor. But for on our end, especially in the subcommittee, especially coming out of COVID, broadband is going to be one of the number one things we're going to be talking about, and how we're going to get that broadband, especially through the infrastructure package, with all that money out there across. Because again, we're looking at all of those unserved, underserved areas, making sure they get it and when they need it. Because again, we all saw what happened from telehealth. It's just like being in meetings not long before COVID hit, and I can still remember some people are saying that telehealth will never work. And 4 weeks into COVID, we all heard this. If we didn't have telehealth, we'd all be, just completely underwater right now. So I think when you think about from permitting to making sure that we get the oversight, to making sure that we get the broadband from 5G to, we're talking about 6G. When you think about what we're looking at and some of the hearings we've had just on, satellite technology and what we have to do out there. So I think that you look at all these different areas, and then Section 230 that'll be coming up, but we'll have I'll guarantee everybody this, we'll have a lot to do.
Yeah. Well, as we talk about permitting, you've been a leader on this issue, and we hope to work with the entire Energy and Commerce Committee on a broad package of permitting reforms. And as it affects the broadband industry, it's everything, from rights of way, access, fees, making sure that they're reasonable, that as our companies seek to enter a market, deploy a new network, connect everyone in that market or that town or on Main Street, that they're not delayed unnecessarily by permits just sitting on a desk and not getting
Right.
Approved. And so how do we use some of the principles that you've led on of certain time periods or shot clocks, the reasonableness of fees? We had Commissioner Carr earlier talking about all the things that he's been trying to do at the commission. And we'd love to work with you on the committee on the efforts to make sure that permitting and access and fees don't undermine the broadband deployments, both private and the new funding coming in from BEAD, to delay and add cost to broadband connectivity. Any other thoughts on things that you see should be done or could be done, or ways we can help you?
Well, and again, when you talk about on that permitting side and things not getting done in time, this is where the oversight comes in. I mean, you just pull everybody in, and we've got to have everybody in, and you've got to have all of the departments and agencies working together, not going in their separate directions. And that's another thing we have to make sure there's a coordinated effort out there. And that goes into a lot of other things when you think about mapping and down the road. But all these things all tie together. And so one of the things that, my doors, as I've always said, is always open. So if people are seeing things and hearing things, or things aren't going right, then come in and see me, because that's we have pretty good access to all the agencies and the departments to say what's going on out there to get this stuff done.
And as we talked to our earlier panel, Chairman Thompson and Senator Fisher, we had a broadband officer from my home state of Mississippi, and we were talking about permitting on public or federal lands. And so with the Farm Bill, you had the Forest Service. How can we help them with the resources to give permits in a timely way, in a reasonable way? One of the other roadblocks that our members face too often is when we come to a rail crossing. And I know Ohio has been in the news here lately with a tragic rail accident. But what we would like to do is work with Congress, work with the railroad industry to find a way to have more reasonable standards on how much time for the railroads to respond to a permit, uh, shot clocks, and reasonableness of fees. In a number of states, about 5 states have adopted laws to try to help broadband access to cross the railroads. And so anything that we can do to work with you is another barrier that we would like to remove.
Well, and again, that's working with all of the different committees that have jurisdiction. Years ago, when I served on transportation infrastructure, everybody has to work together on this because, again, it's not a single committee that has that jurisdiction that we all have to. But again, it goes down to that, what you said, reasonableness and why is it taking so long? Is this going to sit on someone's desk and get to it when they want to, or do we have to have those shot clocks?
And so our staff has been meeting with the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, your committee, and key members. And so we want to. It's a major issue as we talk to our member companies. Too often, we hear issues that could really undermine both the private investment and the public investment in broadband networks. So we'll try to herd all the cats in all the committees to get a unified consensus of ways we can streamline.
And going back to the early point you made, this all costs money, and the longer it takes, the more expensive it gets.
Right.
So time is money in this.
Yeah, very much so. And one other key component of getting this right is to make sure that our maps are accurate and are constantly evolving and emerging. And as we make the decisions on where to strategically target the broadband investments. Any thoughts you have on mapping and how the FCC and NTIA can work together to get the best, most accurate data to make the best investments?
Well, and this goes back a good number of years when we were asked to look at the maps, and they said, "Here, look at your maps of your district and your state," and we saw what the FCC had come up with.
Yeah.
And I remember contacting the chairman at that time and saying, "I hate to tell you this, your maps aren't right." As I drive through my district, I can tell you when I go in and out of areas and also communities that are struggling right now without it. So Matt, you have to get the maps right. And we've invested $98 million in this little process now to make sure that we can get this mapping done, get it done right. And so, I think that, it was not too long ago that the chairman over at the FCC, they came out with online, so you can put your address in there to see if you do or don't. And then there's a challenge process. I think it was too short to begin with, but I think that, as we look down the road, there would be more opportunities to keep correcting this. And so I think that, as we go forward again, we've got to find those truly unserved areas out there. And, I've always told people, not that I'm against certain industries or anything like that, but I always ask people, if you're in business in an area that is either unserved or underserved in what you have out there in your service, if somebody's trying to find you, when was the last time, I'll ask this question, when was in the last 5 years, did somebody look in the yellow pages? Nobody. So, this is what we're looking at now. So if you're going to a search engine, and if that person, that small company, this also affects our rural parts of our district. If you're in a rural area and you don't have it, then all of a sudden you can't be found. So either you have to make a decision. You go out of business or you move. Well, that hurts that smaller community then that they no longer have those jobs there. So we want to make sure that those truly unserved areas are served, and that's having those accurate maps. And that's why with the legislation that I had out there, to make sure that we had those right maps, and to make sure, and here's the other part of those, having those right maps. It's just not for the FCC, but you think of NTIA and you think about ag, all of them. We should be working off the same maps. So everybody is using the same data to make sure as you go forward, everyone's got, under the same parameters. But those maps have got to be accurate. And, as I said, as they get more information from their website, it's going to help everybody.
As you're talking about maps, and as a former member, I think every office you go into, you'll see a map of a district that that member represents, and the outline of it, the towns, tell everybody here your district, the map, the people, the key sectors in the economy, and how broadband connects,
Yeah.
and why you've chosen to be a leader of the subcommittee that oversees all of that. Why is that strategically important for your district and to you?
Well, after redistricting in Ohio, my district now goes from the Indiana line, 185 miles, to the Cleveland suburbs. And so it's kind of a line across. But my districts are unique in that I've got 76,000 manufacturing jobs. I've done about 1,300 meetings in my district in the last 9.5 years since they've been keeping track of me. I'd like to know how many it would have been before that. But also, I have one of the largest ag districts in the state. And so when you look at what the industries that we have, give you an example. Years ago when I'd be going into a business or a factory or a manufacturing site, and I'd say, okay, how many widgets or whatever that you're making, or what are you doing in a day? Well, they'd have to get out a piece of paper and they'd look at it. Well, today they've got it right in their hand. It's right in time on some kind of a pad that they're carrying around with them. So it's so important to them that they have that connectivity in there. I won't go through the names of the companies, but I've got quite a few different warehouses in my district that are national. And not too many years ago, they had, I'd say, what's your online business that you're doing in here? Well, it'd be like this row, about the length of these row of chairs right here. Now you go in there, it's massive. And so many companies now are relying on that as they go forward. I've got a small clothing retailer in my district. It's been in the family for years, about 3 generations, and it's in a small town. Most people think, how does a small clothing store stay open? Well, what they've done is they've captured the internet. So now they sell all these things on the internet for people across the entire country. So from agriculture to manufacturing. And so when I look at my district and wanting to be at C&T, and I've been fortunate to be on the subcommittee since I've gotten on the committee back in 2010, that I see all of the things that everything connects together, from healthcare to manufacturing to agriculture. So everything pulls together into one thing.
Earlier we had Congresswoman Matsui, who is the ranking member on the subcommittee. She speaks very warmly of you. Talk a little bit. Most people who may not come to Washington that often may not realize that the media covers the controversy and the divisions. But talk a little bit about your relationship with Congresswoman Matsui and the things that y'all can do to work together.
Well, you're absolutely right, because I always say there's 5 or 6 hot button issues out there that's always being covered. Yeah. But if you really look, if you go down to the floor on any given day and watch what's happening in the House of Representatives, a lot of this is going through suspension with, a voice vote, meaning the voice vote of people on the floor at that time, like 4 or 5 people, and it moves on unless somebody objects to it. And so it's really down the road that there's those 5 or 6 things that get the attention, but it's all the other issues that we've got to go on. Let's for broadband, for instance. We all need it. It's not a Republican, Democrat, or Independent issue. It's just that we've got to get that out there. And how do we get it out to our constituents? So it's all those things that we can find that the Congresswoman and I can work together on, that we know, and we work on those things. The first thing that you usually say in committee, we have a markup. Do we have any bipartisan? Those are the first amendments that come up. Do we have any bipartisan amendments? Because those are the ones that we can, everyone's already worked on. But E&C is another committee, in my opinion, that does its best to try to reach across the aisle to make sure. I know when I did the autonomous vehicle legislation in the 115th Congress, and I'll guarantee everybody I'll bring it back and we're going to get it done. But when we had it in, we had it pass out of committee 52-0. And it was voiced on the floor. And then over the Senate, we had a little problem. I won't get into that right now. But it's those things that we had over 300 meetings on that piece of legislation, and I don't know how many meetings we had back and forth with our Democrat counterparts to make it a good bill.
What you're hearing is a true legislator, someone who's trying to make policy and build the relationships and the consensus. And so it is refreshing to see your relationship with Congresswoman Matsui. One of the things that I talked with her about is spectrum policy and trying to get the authorization for auction authority done this year. Uh, Tell us how that's going, if and when it's going to get done, and any other thoughts of what should be done.
Well, we're at that March 9th deadline real quick, and this is something that's not, this is why we got to do things. Only in government, especially federal government, do you ever set these short timelines? And it's just like, does anybody in the rural world operate then? So again, we've got to make sure that we've got a date out there, like say 36 months, that everybody knows what's out that you can do and what's going to be available. But the idea of doing these very short extensions, it's always makes it very tough for those in the industry to set what they're going to do. How do you do that? We say, okay, wait a minute. What happens if they don't get it reauthorized by March the 9th? Or do we push it off, to the middle of May? And, do they then at that time finally say, okay, we can find a bill out there, get it either, amended in or have a standalone to get it done. But we've got to make sure that we're telling industry and everyone else out there exactly what's there so we can make sure that they can move forward without, again, only the federal government operates on a one-year budget. Well, actually, we don't even do a budget, but it comes down to that all the things that we look at, and they say, well, why aren't you doing this stuff? Well, how are you supposed to be a small business or a large business and say, I don't know what the rules are or what the time is?
Well, as we've had conversations all day, it's all about how do we use the fuel of the funding, the historic funding, and for all of our member companies, we're also seeing historic private sector funding, private equity, investment, infrastructure. This is the golden age of fiber and 5G and the advanced networks and the new innovations in satellite deployments. And so we have massive private investment, historic federal investment. The second thing we've been talking about is how do we remove the barriers that are delaying and adding cost to the build outs with the permitting and unreasonable fees at possible points of deployment. The third thing is how do we get the spectrum that we need infused into all of these efforts. Later today, we'll have Scott Harris, who heads up the NTIA Spectrum Plan, come talk to us about what he's doing. And so once you get authorization for the auctions, what is the pipeline that is to come to infuse both funding and spectrum, the critical inputs to deploy the networks of the future? And you're going to be kind of at the crossroads of all of that. And so it's a good place to be, and for your district, they're fortunate that you're in that position. We lost a good member from Ohio, Senator Portman, who also was a leader on broadband and on the Bridge Act last year. Tell us a little bit about the Ohio delegation, all of how large it is, how y'all work together, and how do you coordinate your strategic priorities?
Well, first of all, pardon me, it's shrinking, unfortunately, because it's not that we're depopulating, we're just not keeping up with everybody else. When I was younger, my dad was in Congress, we had 24 members, we're down to 15. So some people say, how come your districts are getting so big? Well, if you get more people moving down to Florida or someplace else, we'll keep people right there. But I always say we have things in Ohio that a lot of people don't have. We have great workers. We've got great transportation. We have great universities and colleges. And the one thing that they sure don't have in the South and Southwest, we have water. So, when we work together, we try to find those things that we're all, because again, you look around Ohio, pretty much everybody's districts always have manufacturing. Some don't have the agriculture. I have both. And when you have one of the largest, if not the largest, ag districts, and I used to have 86,000 manufacturing jobs, and before redistricting, that was almost the largest, I think, manufacturing district. So, we look for all those things and have to work together and make sure when you think about utilities and everything else out there, that we're all on the same page to get things done. But just to follow one thing up about when you're talking about the government and especially NTIA, one thing I also want to always make sure is that the federal government is not picking winners and losers in this game. There's so many different ways that things are deployed, but if they come out and say it, I'm usually going to say that the federal government will always pick the wrong thing and think that everybody else is going to, fit into that pattern. It doesn't work that way.
Well, and that is a good segue. Our whole mission is to promote free market competition among broadband providers. Every network, every technology, to really remove barriers for new entrants and new ideas and entrepreneurs to compete. Share with us a little bit of your philosophy of competition. I know you started it with we shouldn't be picking winners and losers. Anything else that is important to you?
Well, when I go across my district or go to different places in the United States, the one thing I'm just always amazed at. I never would have thought of this. All these different things that these companies and small business, small, medium, or large, I always say, how did you ever come up with this? And so that's the great thing about making sure you have the right laws and regulations in place to make sure that we have those entrepreneurs and the innovators out there doing it. Why does when you look at the things that are invented in this country, why aren't they doing it around the world? Because this is where everybody wants to be. This is the place of opportunity. So that's why I want to make sure that we do have those right laws in place because, again, as I said earlier, we look over the horizon 5 to 10 years, and we've got to make sure that we're not putting somebody behind that proverbial 8 ball because, again, they might have already passed it. And so we want to make sure that they can get that done here. So that's one of my big things is always making sure that we have that ability for those people to be out there. This has always been the land of opportunity. And when you think about all the patents that are registered every year across the globe, look what's done here in the United States. Because people, again, first of all, when I talk to people that come into my district with a new company, why are they there? It's the first thing they always say, it's the people. And so that's one of the greatest attributes that we have, and we should never forget that.
Well, we appreciate all the good work you do, and we look forward to working with you on permitting reforms, on the funding oversight, getting spectrum into the pipeline,
Absolutely.
and all the other things that it enables and connects. So thank you for coming
Well, thank
again.
you very much.
And we look forward to working with you.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.